When Isabella Martinez walked into her cousin's lavish wedding wearing a thrift store dress, she expected whispers. What she didn't expect was Victoria Ashworth publicly calling her ugly in front of 300 guests, but Victoria had no idea that the quiet woman she humiliated was about to reveal a family secret that would turn the entire wedding upside down. Isabella had always been the family's afterthought. While her cousins lived in sprawling estates and attended private schools, she grew up in a modest apartment above her mother's small bakery in downtown Phoenix. Her world consisted of early morning bread deliveries, evening bookkeeping, and weekend farmers markets where she sold her mother's pastries. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 28, Isabella possessed a quiet beauty that expensive clothes and makeup couldn't manufacture. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple bun, her hands bore the honest calluses of hard work, and her smile carried genuine warmth that had charmed countless customers over the years. She dressed practically, shopped carefully, and saved every penny she could spare. The Martinez family tree was complicated. Isabella's mother Carmen had grown up poor alongside her sister Elena, but their paths diverged dramatically when Elena married into the wealthy Ramirez construction empire. While Carmen chose love with Isabella's father, a kind electrician who died when Isabella was 12, Elena chose security and social status. This created a family divide that followed Isabella throughout her life. Every holiday gathering, every birthday party, every celebration became a reminder of what she didn't have. Her cousins Sofia and Diego attended private universities while Isabella worked her way through community college. They vacationed in Europe while she spent summers working double shifts at the bakery. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Isabella was calculating wholesale flour costs when her mother handed her the heavy cream envelope embossed with gold lettering. Sofia Ramirez was marrying Marcus Worthington III, heir to a hotel fortune, in what the invitation described as the social event of the season. Isabella traced the elegant script with her finger. The venue was the Grand Meridian Country Club, a place she'd only seen in magazines. The dress code specified formal attire, and there was a handwritten note from Sofia at the bottom requesting Isabella serve as one of the greeters, welcoming guests as they arrived. Carmen noticed Isabella's hesitation. "You don't have to go, Misha. We both know why she wants you there." Her mother's voice carried decades of hurt from family gatherings where they'd been treated like poor relations invited out of obligation rather than love. But Isabella felt something stubborn rise within her chest. "No, Mama, I'm tired of hiding from them. Sofia is my cousin, and if she wants me there, I'll be there." The next 2 weeks became a careful balancing act between pride and practicality. Isabella couldn't afford the designer gowns her cousins expected, but she refused to embarrass herself either. She visited 3 different thrift stores before finding a navy blue dress that fit perfectly. It was simple, elegant, and cost $30. She paired it with her only good shoes and her grandmother's small pearl earrings. The morning of the wedding, Isabella stood before her bedroom mirror practicing her smile. She'd watched enough family gatherings to know the drill: be polite, stay in the background, and don't give anyone reason to comment on her circumstances. Her reflection showed a woman who looked exactly like what she was: working class, unpretentious, and trying her best. The Grand Meridian Country Club exceeded every expectation Isabella had built in her mind. Marble columns supported soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across white walls, and perfectly manicured gardens stretched toward distant mountains. Luxury cars lined the circular drive as uniformed valets guided guests toward the ceremony site. Isabella walked through the main entrance feeling like an imposter. Other women glided past in designer gowns that probably cost more than Isabella made in 6 months. Their jewelry sparkled, their hair was professionally styled, and they moved with the confident grace of people who belonged in places like this. She found the guest services table where Sofia had requested she help with greetings. The other greeters were Sofia's sorority sisters, all perfectly polished and chatting about recent trips to Aspen and upcoming charity galas. They acknowledged Isabella with polite but distant smiles before returning to their conversations about people and places Isabella had never heard of. The ceremony was held in the club's rose garden, where 300 guests sat in elegant white chairs facing an altar adorned with thousands of white orchids. Isabella recognized many faces from family gatherings: successful uncles, accomplished aunts, cousins who'd married well and lived beautifully. They nodded at her with the same polite distance they'd always maintained. Sofia looked radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, every inch the society bride she'd always dreamed of becoming. Marcus stood beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, representing everything their combined families valued: wealth, status, and social position. The ceremony was flawless, expensive, and photographed by professionals who would ensure every moment was preserved for posterity. During the cocktail hour, Isabella dutifully helped direct guests toward the reception hall while trying to ignore the conversation swirling around her. She overheard fragments about stock portfolios, real estate investments, and upcoming fundraisers for causes she'd never heard of. The women discussed personal trainers and interior designers while the men debated golf club memberships and business acquisitions. Then Victoria Ashworth arrived. Isabella had heard about Victoria through family gossip but had never met her in person. She was Marcus's sister, a woman who'd married into pharmaceutical money and never let anyone forget it. Victoria swept into the cocktail hour, wearing a gown that probably cost more than Isabella's annual rent, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves and her jewelry catching the light with every gesture. Victoria approached the guest services table where Isabella was organizing seating cards. She looked Isabella up and down with unconcealed disdain, taking in the thrift store dress, the simple shoes, and the modest jewelry with barely concealed disgust. "You must be one of Sofia's charity cases," Victoria announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Her voice carried the particular cruelty of someone accustomed to saying whatever she pleased without consequence. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "I'm Isabella Martinez, Sofia's cousin. I'm helping with guest services tonight." Victoria's laugh was sharp and calculating. "Of course you are. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us." Now back to the story. "Someone has to do the work while the rest of us enjoy ourselves." She gestured dismissively at Isabella's appearance. "Though I have to say, Sofia should have warned the help about appropriate attire. That dress belongs at a church potluck, not a society wedding." The conversations around them gradually quieted as other guests became aware of the exchange. Isabella felt dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see how she would respond to Victoria's public humiliation. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the seating cards, but she refused to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Isabella began carefully. "I'm family, not staff." Victoria's expression grew even more contemptuous. "Family, please. Look at yourself and look around this room. You stick out like a sore thumb. That sad little dress, those bargain shoes, that amateur makeup job. You look exactly like what you are, poor, plain, and completely out of place." The words hit Isabella like physical blows. She'd expected condescension, even rudeness, but not this level of public cruelty. Victoria was performing for her audience, using Isabella's humiliation as entertainment for the wealthy guests who'd gathered around to watch. "Honestly," Victoria continued, emboldened by the attention she was receiving, "it's almost embarrassing for Sofia to have such an ugly duckling in her family. Couldn't you have at least tried to clean yourself up for her special day? This is a society wedding, not a homeless shelter fundraiser." Isabella's vision blurred with tears, but something deeper than hurt was building in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. Victoria was attacking her mother's sacrifices, her father's memory, and everyone who'd ever struggled to make ends meet while maintaining their dignity. "I may not have your money, or your designer dress," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger despite the tears threatening to fall, "but at least I know the difference between class and cruelty. Money can't buy character, and you've just proven that beautifully." Victoria's face flushed with anger at being challenged in front of her peers. "Character? What would someone like you know about character? You're nothing but a poor little nobody playing dress-up at a real wedding. Everyone here can see exactly what you are, common, cheap, and completely insignificant." The circle of onlookers had grown larger, with guests pulling out phones to record the spectacle. Isabella realized that her humiliation was about to become social media entertainment, shared and reshared among people who would never see her as anything more than a punchline. But as Victoria prepared to deliver another cutting remark, something unexpected happened. A man's voice cut through the crowd, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "That's quite enough." The voice belonged to someone Isabella had never seen before, a distinguished gentleman in his early 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded her somehow of her late father. He moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, and Isabella noticed how the other guests automatically stepped aside to let him pass. Victoria turned toward the newcomer with obvious irritation at being interrupted. "Excuse me, but this is a private conversation." The gentleman's smile was polite but cold. "Actually, I don't think it was much of a conversation at all," It sounded more like someone using their privilege to hurt someone who couldn't fight back on equal terms. He approached Isabella and extended his hand. I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Robert Chen. Isabella shook his hand, noting his firm grip and the genuine warmth in his expression. Isabella Martinez. I'm Sofia's cousin. Martinez, Robert repeated thoughtfully. Carmen Martinez's daughter. Isabella nodded, surprised he knew her mother's name. Yes, she owns the bakery downtown. Robert's face brightened. Carmen's bakery. I've been buying her tres leches cake for years. Your mother is an artist with desserts. He turned back to Victoria, whose face had grown increasingly pale during this exchange. And you are? Victoria straightened, clearly hoping to regain control of the situation. I'm Victoria Ashworth, Marcus's sister. My husband owns Ashworth Pharmaceuticals. Ah yes, Robert said mildly. I'm familiar with your husband's work. Interesting business model, though I've always wondered about the ethics of pricing life-saving medications beyond what ordinary people can afford. The crowd around them shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's face had gone from pale to bright red as she realized she was being publicly criticized by someone whose opinion clearly mattered to these people. Now, Robert continued, I couldn't help but overhear your comments about Isabella's appearance and background. I found them quite revealing, not about her, but about you. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but Robert held up a gentle hand that somehow commanded absolute silence. You see, I've learned something interesting over the years. The people who feel the need to tear others down in public usually do so because they're desperately insecure about their own worth. True confidence doesn't require cruelty as its foundation. Isabella watched in amazement as Victoria struggled to find a response. The woman who'd seemed so powerful and cruel just moments before now looked small and defensive under Robert's calm scrutiny. Furthermore, Robert said, I find it fascinating that you would judge someone's worth based on the price of their clothing rather than the content of their character. It suggests a rather limited understanding of what actually matters in this world. The gathered crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Isabella could see phones being quietly lowered as people realized they were witnessing something more significant than social media drama. Robert turned back to Isabella with a warm smile. Your dress is lovely, by the way, classic, elegant, and perfect for the occasion. Sometimes the most beautiful things are also the most genuine. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than humiliation. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Robert said with a mysterious smile that sent curious whispers through the crowd. The evening is just getting started. Robert's words hung in the air as the crowd waited for whatever would happen next. Victoria stood frozen, her earlier confidence completely shattered by his calm dismantling of her cruelty. Isabella could see other guests whispering among themselves, clearly recognizing Robert's authority even if she didn't understand it yet. Sofia appeared through the crowd, her wedding dress rustling as she approached with obvious concern. Is everything all right here? I heard there was some kind of commotion. Victoria immediately seized the opportunity to redirect attention. Your cousin here seems to have confused herself with an actual guest rather than the help. I was simply pointing out that she's not exactly dressed appropriately for your wedding. Sofia's expression tightened. Isabella had seen that look before at family gatherings, the moment when Sofia had to choose between defending family or maintaining her social standing. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited to see which way the bride would lean. Isabella is my family, Sofia said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. She's here because I invited her. To work the greeting table, Victoria added pointedly, which is fine, but she should understand her place. Robert stepped forward again, his presence commanding immediate attention. Speaking of understanding one's place, I think there might be some confusion about exactly who belongs where tonight. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone, scrolling through something before showing the screen to Sofia. I believe congratulations are in order. This is quite an impressive venue you've chosen for your celebration. Sofia glanced at the phone and her face went completely white. Oh my God, you're Robert Chen. You own the Grand Meridian Country Club. A collective gasp went through the gathered crowd. Isabella felt her own mouth fall open as the revelation sank in. Robert Chen wasn't just another wealthy guest, he owned the entire venue where they were celebrating. Among other properties, yes, Robert said modestly. I've been in hospitality and real estate development for quite some time now. This club has been one of my favorite acquisitions. Victoria's face had drained of all color. She'd just spent the last 10 minutes insulting someone in front of the man who owned the very ground they were standing on. Her husband's pharmaceutical company undoubtedly did business with Chen's various enterprises, making her behavior not just rude but potentially catastrophic for their family's business interests. "Mr. Chen," Victoria stammered, "I had no idea you were here tonight. If I'd known, you would have behaved differently." Robert interrupted gently, "That's interesting. I've always believed that how we treat people when we think no one important is watching reveals our true character." Sofia was still staring at Robert in shock. "I don't understand. How do you know Isabella? Why are you here?" Robert smiled and turned to Isabella with an expression that was suddenly much warmer and more personal. "That's an excellent question. Isabella, do you remember your mother ever mentioning someone named Bobby from her childhood?" Sofia, her mother had indeed mentioned Bobby many times over the years, her childhood friend who'd been like a brother to her before his family moved away when they were teenagers. Carmen had often wondered what happened to him, saying he was the only person who ever truly understood her dreams of opening her own bakery. "Bobby?" Isabella whispered. "You're my mother's Bobby, guilty as charged," Robert said with a grin that suddenly made him look decades younger. "Though I go by Robert now. I've been trying to track down your mother for years, but Carmen is a common name and I didn't know she'd married and changed her surname." The crowd around them was hanging on every word, but Isabella only had eyes for Robert. "She talks about you all the time. She says you used to help her practice making pastries in your grandmother's kitchen. And she taught me that the secret ingredient in everything good is love," Robert replied. "I've carried that lesson through every business venture I've ever undertaken." Victoria looked like she might faint. Marcus had appeared beside his sister, his face grave as he processed the implications of what was unfolding. The pharmaceutical heir clearly understood that his sister had just publicly humiliated the daughter of someone who wielded enormous influence in their business community. "I still don't understand," Sofia said weakly. "If you're friends with Aunt Carmen, why haven't you contacted our family before?" Robert's expression grew more serious. "Because 30 years ago when I was starting my first business I asked your Aunt Elena for a loan to help me get established. I offered her a partnership that would have made your family extraordinarily wealthy." The gathered crowd was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something far more significant than wedding drama. "Elena turned me down," Robert continued. "She said she wouldn't risk her money on the dreams of poor people who didn't understand their place in the world. She told me that people like Carmen and me should be satisfied with small lives and stop reaching for things we couldn't earn." Isabella felt her knees go weak. Her Aunt Elena had rejected a business partnership with someone who would go on to become one of the most successful developers in the country. The Martinez family could have been wealthy for generations if not for Elena's prejudice and short-sightedness. "So you see," Robert said, his voice carrying across the silent garden, "when I heard someone at this wedding insulting Carmen's daughter for being poor and plain and out of place, it brought back some very specific memories." Victoria made a strangled sound that might have been an attempt at an apology, but Robert wasn't finished. "I've spent the last 20 years building a business empire worth approximately $3 billion. I own hotels, restaurants, country clubs and residential developments across the western United States. And do you know what I've learned in all that time?" He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. "I've learned that the most valuable people in the world are often the ones who work hardest, love deepest and treat others with genuine kindness. I've learned that real class has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with character." Robert turned to Isabella, his expression soft with affection. "Your mother raised an extraordinary daughter. You've worked alongside her building something beautiful and meaningful with your own hands. You've earned every dollar you've ever made through honest labor and dedication. That's worth more than inherited wealth will ever be." Tears were streaming down Isabella's face now, but they were tears of vindication rather than humiliation. Around them, the wedding guests were murmuring among themselves, clearly reassessing everything they thought they knew about social hierarchies and worth. Furthermore, Robert continued, reaching into his jacket again, "I've been looking for the right partners to help me expand my hospitality business into artisanal food services. Carmen's Bakery has exactly the kind of authentic quality I want to associate with my brand." He handed Isabella an envelope with the Chen Industries logo embossed on the front. This is a preliminary contract offering your mother an exclusive partnership to provide baked goods for all my West Coast properties. The initial contract is worth $2 million, with opportunities for expansion as we grow together. Isabella's hand shook as she held the envelope. $2 million would transform not just their business but their entire lives. Her mother could expand the bakery, hire help, maybe even retire comfortably someday. But I don't understand, Isabella whispered. Why now? Why tonight? Robert's smile was gentle and sad at the same time. Because I've been carrying guilt for 30 years about not staying in touch with the people who mattered most to me. Because I let success make me forget where I came from and who helped me get there. And because seeing you treated with such cruelty reminded me that I have the power to make things right. He looked around at the gathered crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. I built my fortune on a simple principle that your mother taught me when we were children: treat people with kindness and respect regardless of their circumstances. It served me well in business and in life. Victoria had gone completely silent, her earlier cruelty replaced by obvious terror about the consequences of her actions. Marcus was whispering urgently in her ear, probably calculating the damage she'd done to their family's business relationships. Sofia stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. Isabella, I'm so sorry, I had no idea about any of this. If you'd known I had connections to wealthy people, you would have treated me differently. Isabella interrupted, finding her voice at last. That's exactly the problem, Sofia. My worth as a person shouldn't depend on who I know or how much money I have access to. The bride's face crumpled as she realized the truth of Isabella's words. She'd spent years treating her cousin like a poor relation because it made her feel superior, never considering that Isabella's circumstances didn't define her value as a human being. Robert placed a protective hand on Isabella's shoulder. I think what Isabella is trying to say is that respect and kindness shouldn't be conditional on someone's net worth or social connections. They should be the baseline for how we treat every person we encounter. He turned to address the entire gathered crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. I've had the privilege of building wealth and success, but I've never forgotten that my greatest treasures are the relationships I've maintained with people who knew me before I had anything to offer except friendship. The crowd began to disperse slowly, guests returning to the reception with plenty to discuss among themselves. Isabella could already hear fragments of conversation as people processed what they'd witnessed and reconsidered their own assumptions about worth and status. Victoria approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Mr. Chen, I want to apologize for my behavior. I was completely out of line. Robert studied her for a moment before responding. The apology you owe isn't to me, Victoria. I wasn't the one you humiliated in front of 300 people. Victoria turned to Isabella, her face flushed with shame. Isabella, I'm truly sorry. I said horrible things that were completely unjustified. I was cruel and wrong, and I hope you can forgive me. Isabella looked at the woman who tried to destroy her confidence just an hour earlier. Part of her wanted to reject the apology, to let Victoria suffer the consequences of her cruelty, but her mother had raised her to be better than that. I accept your apology, Isabella said quietly, but I hope you'll remember this the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their appearance or circumstances. Victoria nodded gratefully before retreating with Marcus, both of them clearly eager to escape the situation they'd created. As the garden began to empty, Robert turned to Isabella with a warm smile. I have a confession to make. I've been following your family's story for years. I hired a private investigator to track down Carmen after my business took off, but I was too proud to reach out directly. I was afraid she'd think I was showing off or trying to prove something. Isabella shook her head in amazement. She would have been thrilled to hear from you. She still talks about how you believed in her dreams when no one else did. Then it's time I stopped being a coward and called my oldest friend, Robert said. But first I have a question for you. Would you consider coming to work for Chen Industries? I could use someone with your integrity and work ethic to help me expand the food service division. Isabella felt overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. Just hours ago she'd been dreading this wedding, expecting nothing but subtle humiliation and family tension. Now she was being offered opportunities that could transform her entire life. I need to talk to my mother first, she said carefully. We've built the bakery together and I won't abandon her for my own advancement. Robert's smile widened. I wouldn't expect anything less from Carmen's daughter. In fact, I was hoping you'd both consider relocating to Los Angeles to oversee our flagship location. Carmen could run the bakery operation while you handle business development and expansion. Isabella's mind raced with possibilities. Los Angeles meant leaving everything familiar behind, but it also meant opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. It meant financial security for her mother, professional growth for herself, and the chance to build something meaningful alongside someone who truly valued their contributions. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked. "All the time you need," Robert assured her. "But I hope you'll at least let me take you and Carmen to dinner this week. I have 30 years of catching up to do, and I'd like to hear about all the amazing things you've both accomplished." As they walked back toward the reception hall, Isabella felt like she was living in a dream. The wedding guests who'd watched her humiliation earlier now nodded respectfully as she passed, clearly recalibrating their assessment of her importance. But more than their changed behavior, she treasured Robert's words about worth and character. She'd come to this wedding expecting to be treated as a poor relation, and instead she'd discovered family she never knew she had. Victoria's cruelty had been intended to diminish her, but it had instead revealed the true character of everyone involved. The reception continued around them, but Isabella barely noticed the luxury and elegance that had intimidated her earlier. She understood now that real wealth wasn't measured in designer gowns or expensive venues, but in the relationships that sustained you and the character that defined you. As Robert guided her toward the head table where he'd apparently been seated as an honored guest, Isabella realized that sometimes the universe had a way of balancing the scales. What had begun as an evening of expected humiliation had transformed into a night of vindication and new possibilities. Her mother had always taught her that kindness and hard work would eventually be rewarded, even if it took longer than expected. Tonight, 30 years after Elena Martinez had rejected Robert Chen's partnership offer, justice had finally arrived, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and carrying the power to change everything. Isabella smiled as she took her seat beside the man who just reminded an entire room of wealthy guests that true class couldn't be bought, only earned through how you treated others when you thought no one important was watching. Some lessons, she reflected, were worth waiting a lifetime to learn. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.